Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm talking about the second of 2 episodes that Sissy Spacek guest starred in this case from Season 2, The Odyssey. One of the first things I noticed in this episode was how long my hair was. Oh my goodness, I'd forgotten it was ever that long. I used to just kind of let it grow. And I remember there was a point, and as I get through more seasons, I expect I will find the point where one of our hairstylists said, "Oh, you have really bad split ends, and let me just trim those up." And I thought, yeah, sure. Well, my hair kind of came down to a V, and she basically leveled it where the V started. So rather than kind of trimming all of that, so all of a sudden it was, a good 8-10 inches shorter. Never grew long again. Sad but true. The other thing I noticed on my hair was there's kind of a line about here. In the homecoming, they wanted all the children to be redheads because there's a story point about that. So I didn't have red hair. They dyed my hair a sort of a dark auburn kind of a color. And then after we filmed the homecoming, I just kind of left it alone and let it start growing out. It was probably about 6 months later that we started season 1 of the Waltons. And what they did was they decided they weren't going to worry about all of us having red hair. And my hair had probably grown out to, about here, somewhere around there. And what they did was they said, well, we will put a rinse, so a non-permanent kind of color or dye or something. I don't remember if it was rinse or dye. But anyway, they said from the point of where my own hair had grown out to the rest of it, they would try to match my natural color. So they did that. So as it continued to grow, we did that. And then when it hit about here, they decided not to worry about it anymore. So that must have been when that happened, because I'm like, that's kind of 2 different colors. So if you notice that, now you know why. Early on, I am feeding a baby lamb, another animal on the Waltons. This one, I guess, was pretty benign to work with. And I'm doing it for some sort of a contest, and at the fair, I need a pen built for it. So I go and I talk John Boy into doing it, as does everybody else with different things. Ben and Jason are building a soapbox derby car, and they want John Boy's help to get the wheels on, and everybody seems to want something from John Boy. So finally he gets thoroughly frustrated by the whole thing and says that he is going to go off up to, I believe, the McGregor cabin up in the mountain, so that he can have some peace and quiet to work, to write. Another case of ad-libs. At the top of the scene, they have called the doctor and Dr. Vance because Jim Bob is running quite a fever, and John Boy has to turn over his room to Jim Bob. But before the doctor comes back in, as John and John Boy are sitting by the fireplace, the first line in that scene would have been, "Oh, Doc," and whatever they asked the doctor, "How is Jim Bob?" So this conversation, these couple lines that happened before, would have been Ralph and Richard just ad-libbing. So otherwise the scene would have seemed like lifeless until the doctor entered. So this was their way of filling with life, with real life sort of things, and ad-libs until the doctor appeared. So here you will hear that.
Yeah, so my brother said to me, "Oh, Doc, but how is he?"
As John Boy heads up to the McGregor cabin, he comes across Granny Ketchum, who is trying to get this mule, Blue, you might recognize, out of her garden. John Boy stops and helps her get the mule out of her garden and tie it up someplace where it will not eat her cabbages. And we find out that Granny Ketchum has a whole garden and collects things that are natural herbs and natural healing plants and things like that, that she is sort of a local natural healer. John Boy finally arrives at the cabin, and he discovers that Sarah Jane Simmons, Sissy Spacek, is already there and quite pregnant. She tells John Boy about having met a young man and that they got married, and now he has gone off to someplace to get a job, make money, and then he's going to send for her. And that she can't go home to her mother's because they had quite an argument, and basically her mother sent her away to another family, and she was supposed to get an education through them. And mostly she said what she ended up doing was working, that they worked her like she was their personal servant. And she did very little in terms of education and ultimately left there. So she knows that she would not be welcome, or feels she would not be welcome back home with her mother, because her mother is very harsh and very judgmental, and Sarah Jane is afraid of her. Back at the Walton house, a storm is starting, and soon it is starting to rain. Initially, we don't see water coming down, but then we do, and everybody gets like absolutely soaked, putting animals in the barn and all of that. And then soon this storm is also raging out at the cabin. Sarah Jane is not doing well. She's getting all anxious and riled up, and ultimately she goes into labor, and John Boy isn't quite sure what to do, and decides that he is going to try and go get Granny Ketchum to help out. Sarah's mother has discovered that Sarah Jane ran away from the people that she was supposed to be staying with, and she is very anxious to figure out where she is and what's happening, and she comes to the Walton house wondering if they might know where she is. John Boy gives this tea to Sarah, and she does start to do better, but the labor is progressing. John Boy, because of the nature of the storm out and how anxious Sarah is, realizes he's going to have to deliver this baby. So he does. And once again, we are working with an infant. And that was always exciting and a little anxious for everybody to make sure that the infant was well taken care of. Jim Bob, who planned to grow tomatoes for his entry into the contest at the fair, finds that the storm has basically destroyed the tomatoes. Grandma steps in and says that she will show him how to make tomato preserves, and she does. Other members of the family come in and they tease Jim Bob and make fun of him, and Grandma tries to get them to stop, but they won't. So just fun family dynamics there. A lovely end sequence where John Boy comes back home with Sarah and Sarah's baby, and she is reconciled with her mother and tells her mother that she is married and that the father of the baby will be sending for her or coming back to get her as soon as he is settled with his new job. After they step away, John and John Boy have a little bit of an exchange, because John Boy thinks that she originally mentioned a different town that her husband went to. And John kind of looks at him and says, "Does it matter?" Open to interpretation. Does that mean Sarah Jane really wasn't sure where he went? That maybe he's completely mythical? Or that he ran off and may not be coming back? I leave it to you. What do you think that meant? On a sad note, John says that a letter was delivered for John Boy. It's from Granny Ketchum. She has passed away, but she has left the mule, Blue, to John Boy. So this is how we first acquired Blue. The fair has turned out to be very successful for the family. Mary Ellen won first prize for Daisy, her lamb. Jim Bob got a third for his tomato preserves. Aaron had a second, and Elizabeth had an honorable mention, whereas Jason and Ben didn't win anything. But everybody now once again has need of John Boy's help, and John Boy in this case is quite willing to go and help all of his siblings. Mama asks him what about your writing? And he basically says, "I'm mulling it over." And that's what I have for you for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons about the episode The Odyssey. I will be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.